So, Edinaldo, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Edinaldo?
Yes, I can. Can you hear me?
Okay, let me see. Something's wrong.
Hello, guys. Could you guys hear me fine? Is my microphone working good?
I think so. So can you hear me guys now?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. The AC is working hard here in my office. I tried to turn off, but I can't.
Yeah, it's really, then when they switch to, they turn on the heat and then they're both running at the same time.
So
my office was really loud, but I can't hear it.
okay, great. Because I was trying to record some videos and for the extension of soil health, but I can hear a lot of the AC in the video, so I'm not sure what I'm going to do.
Carlos, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yes. Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Okay. So yeah, I think you put your guest to get muted, and that's probably why I wasn't able to speak.
But Naldo and Carlos, I'm just gonna, I got about 8 or 9 maybe slides, but then just kind of open it up for discussion and that. So hopefully I capture what you guys want.
Yeah, that sounds very good, Dr. Rice. I mean, this can be actually very informal. We do not expect anyone to watch a few sessions from you and Dr. Vera Prasad and Dr. Jagadish and publishing papers in PNAS, for example. It's more, I think it's more about learning what to do and what not to do when writing.
Okay.
Thanks. Yeah, thanks for sharing some of your time with us.
Oh, sure. Glad to do it.
I have to do something. Let's wait a little bit more,
Okay.
maybe 4 minutes. Okay, I think we can go ahead and get started. 4:03, and we have a tight time today. Okay, so welcome everyone. Uh, so this is our first lecture of the Agronomy Graduate Student Association Scientific Writing Lecture Series. So our invited speaker today is Dr. Charles Rice. So Dr. Rice, thanks for accepting the AGSA invitation, for sharing some of your experience with us. So Charles Rice is a University Distinguished Professor and holds the Vanier University Professorship at Kansas State University. He is a professor of soil microbiology in the Department of Agronomy. He earned his degrees from Northern Illinois University and the University of Kentucky. Dr. Rice teaches courses and conducts research on soil carbon and nitrogen, soil health, microbial ecology, and climate change impacts on agricultural and grassland ecosystems. His research includes work in several countries, especially in Brazil. He has advised over 47 graduate students and 10 postdoctorates and has over 200 publications, about 137 peer-reviewed papers, 80 technical and extension publications, 23 book chapters, and uncountable abstracts. Dr. Rice has also served in numerous capacities with professional societies, including President of the Soil Science Society of America in 2011. Internationally, he served on the United Nations Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change to author a report on climate change in 2007 and 2014, and was among scientists recognized when their work won the Nobel Peace Prize in 2007. He is a fellow of the Soil Science Society of America, American Society of Agronomy, and the American Association for the Advancement of Science. In 2017, Dr. Rice received the International Award from the Soil Science Society of America and American Society of Agronomy, and was named the Hugh Haymond Bennett Awardee for the Soil and Water Conservation Society, which recognizes exceptional service and national and international accomplishments in the conservation of soil, water, and natural resources. Most recently, Dr. Rice received the Mid-America Crop Life Educator of the Year Award for demonstrated evidence of consistency and in educating the public on the value of production agriculture. Dr. Rice chairs the Board on Agriculture and Natural Resources of the U.S. National Academies of Science, Engineering, and Medicine. Last but not least, Dr. Rice grants secured over 86 million in grants, of which nearly 40 million he has had direct responsibility at KSU. So with that being said, I want to remind her that the lecture will be recorded and will follow without interruption. So we will call for questions at the end. And at the end, you can both speak up or put your questions in the chat. So welcome, Dr. Rice, and it's all yours.
Hey, thanks, Carlos. I'm not sure I was one of the right ones to talk about writing. It's mostly because of perseverance, and I'll try to talk about that. So if I can share the screen, yeah. Let's see, can you see that all right?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
There we go. So, Arnaldo asked me to talk about exploring your writing strengths and weaknesses. At least probably for me, I'll point out more of my weaknesses maybe, but learning how to improve on my on the strengths and build on that. So as Carlos mentioned, just a little bit about me. You've already heard some of that. I think one thing to point out here, I don't consider myself a natural writer. I've always had to struggle with it and learn by experience. On the other hand, my daughter is an excellent writer, took a journalism major and a very good writer. But it's always been a challenge for me. And what that means is when I sit down to write, I need blocks of time. I need probably 2 to 3 hour blocks. Other people can just sit down in a half hour, get going and put together articles, or at least contribute to an article, but it takes me a little bit more time. I put here on the slide a couple references. The Davis article, Martha Davis was a faculty member at University of Arkansas, where she actually was in the agronomy department there and taught scientific writing, and then wrote this book on how to write scientific papers and give presentations. It's more than nuts and bolts, but this other book by Josh Schimmel, a colleague of mine, wrote this book called Writing Science, and he talks more about the philosophy, some of the different types of writing, whether it's a general science article or a scientific paper for a more discipline specific paper, and then also how you write proposals in that. And if you're going into academia, writing grant proposals is really critical, and how you convey your story is critical. And we can talk about that. Maybe that's another session, how to write grants. So I guess for all you getting started out, and I talked to my lab group, it's really important that you read and read and read and read. Not only for gaining the knowledge, but learning how other people write. And it's kind of by learning from that experience, for seeing the good and bad of writing. I would encourage you to read not only from your discipline, whether you're in genetics or soil microbiology or range science, that of course you need to be up to date on your literature and see how they write those articles. But my postdoc mentor always advised me and coached us to read from related disciplines outside. For my example, soil microbiology, maybe you read about microbiology in marine systems or in aquatic systems. That it's important not only to learn that style, but also then to gain new techniques. And then also read the general science. Nature, PNAS, or science are the three major ones. The Royal Society of from England is also another one that's equivalent to PNAS. PNAS, sorry, is Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences. So find those articles. They're written differently, and I'll try to mention that. When you read those, some of those you want to just read for information, but you might pick some of those articles and really within your own group, maybe the Graduate Student Association or a lab group, but read and critique those articles. What's good about it? What's bad about it? I get a chance to review many manuscripts, and I share some of those in my lab group just to illustrate good and bad writing styles. And I'll try to share with that in the short time that we have. And I'll just emphasize, I've talked to industry people. So whether you're going to academic, industry, or some other related to your profession, written communication is essential for your advancement in communicating what you're your science in that. Okay, so I'm going to kind of go through, I'm not sure exactly how, Ronaldo, you want me to go through that, but I'm going to talk a little bit about the thesis and or writing a research paper, and maybe Dr. Prasad or Dr. Krishna Jagadich will talk a little bit more about this. So when you write your literature review for a thesis, or dissertation, it's going to be much different. It's going to be much longer and hopefully more thorough. I would advise, and I know Carlos hears me and James talk about it, you need to be reading all the time. You know, ideally several papers a week. But it's important that you start on your literature review early in your graduate work so that you can be up on the methods, but also see the writing styles on that. For referee journal articles, the introduction lit review is going to be much shorter, on the order of one page, printed page, and basically you can figure 3 pages double spaced is going to be equivalent to 1 page on the printed page. So 3 to 5 double spaced pages is probably what you're looking for. So it's much more condensed version. If you look at Josh Schimmel's book, he talks about how to write the introduction for journal articles, not so much for the thesis or dissertation, but you need to be more concise and really tell a compelling story. There's a couple different, and there's two different styles. Actually, he actually talks about three styles, but I think there's two major styles. One is writing for your discipline specific area, like Soil Science Society America Journal or Crop Science or Soil Biology, Biochemistry. Those are more for a directed technical audience that should be familiar with some of the basic information. That style of writing is completely different than if you're writing for nature, science, or proceedings, PNAS, Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences, because there you're writing for a general science audience, and so you can't get buried into the technical details as much. In your introduction, it's almost like writing a newspaper article. You have to capture in the first few sentences the essence, the compelling reason why you should read the rest of that story. A lot of time when I work with my students, that literature review introduction is really a synthesis. It's not just a reporting out from the papers that you read. You need to synthesize what is the state of the knowledge in that field or on that topic. When I teach one of my 600 level courses, one of the problems I always get is I tell them read 10 papers and I get 10 paragraphs or 10 sentences back saying so and so found X, Y, and Z. You really need to synthesize that, and it takes time. At least for me, it does. I have to read several papers, put together notes, what they're trying to say, what are their similarities between them, and what your research is going to be in that paper. And I write it and then put it away for a week and then come back to it. And then you're always improving it too while you're doing your research. Hopefully you've done part of this ahead of time. Materials and methods, you can probably read several other theses and dissertations or refereed papers to get an idea on the materials and methods. The key thing is to be thorough, and that's extremely important for the thesis or dissertation. It's better to have more detail than less. And I'm probably guilty of not coaching my students to put in more detail, because when it gets to the defense, then they're always requesting more information. So be as thorough as you can, particularly for the thesis and dissertation. Unfortunately, the refereed paper is a shorter version of that. So you have to leave out some of the detail, particularly, if it's a common method, then you can cite it. And then if there's any variances from that common method, but you can say, well, I hate to give a soils example, but, inorganic nitrogen was measured was extracted with KCl and measured colorimetrically, but then you cite the method. You don't need to say, weighed 10 grams of soil and added 50 mils of 1 molar KCl and shook for 30 minutes at 350 RPMs. You need to probably put that in the thesis or dissertation, but you can't afford to put it into the refereed paper, because a lot of times there's a page limit and you're paying for those pages. The results, okay, this is where I could probably give you a little more advice. My preference and the way I've done it both ways, but Jim Teege was my postdoc mentor, and he's an incredible writer. I should have looked up, but he's got an H index over 100, and he's probably got, I don't know. I know he's got over 100,000 citations. I have a mere 16,000 in my career. But my advice is, at least starting out, that you write the results and the discussion sections separately. You can always combine them. And some journals require that you have a result discussion section. But I think it's easier to start off, particularly early in your career, or at least when you're first writing your thesis, dissertation, to separate out, write the results, because that's about your research. And then the discussion is how your research compares to others in the literature, other results. And then you could talk about why they're different or why they're similar, or synthesize that information. When writing a combined discussion, results and discussion section, sometimes it makes it harder to differentiate your research from others. And you got to be careful that you're trying to separate out those two works, what's in the literature. So that's my advice. You can talk to your advisor, but at least I would start writing out your results separately. Like I say, you can always combine them in later, but it's easier, I think. The way I advise my students is, you got to figure out, when you're writing results, first sit down and get your tables and figures together. And I prefer advising from the tables. Okay, so I want to see the numbers, because sometimes the figures, it's hard to see some of the numbers. But you want to have both the tables with the stats in it, and then if any figures. But you have to decide what's your story, what's your main points. And so then you have to decide, is it better present that data in a table or in a figure? Figures are always easier, but picture is worth 1,000 words, like it's commonly stated. But maybe a table is better, because if it's complex data, a table can illustrate it better. So you need to sit down, and I have my students present both me, because I want to see the table with the stats, and then figure out what's the main story points that you're trying to make, and then maybe a figure is better. But even a figure, you got to decide, if you're going to go with a figure, what kind of figure is best. And again, it's what is the point you're trying to make. Is it better with a line graph, a bar chart, or a bar graph, a pie chart, or some other figure that will drive home your main points? For a thesis or dissertation, I prefer to keep the tables. If you're not using them in the main chapter that will go into a publication, put them in the appendix at the end, because another student may want to, or somebody else might want to come back and see the real numbers, because the figures, you can't see the numbers specifically. And then again, once you got your tables and figures picked out, then sit down and write down, almost like a PowerPoint presentation. What are the 1, 2, or 3 points that you want to make for each table or figure? And it's important how you lay out that figure will illustrate what are the points that you're trying to make. So if you got a treatment combination with the interactions, say tillage and nitrogen rate, well, if nitrogen rates, let's say tillage is not significant, then you don't need to show in a figure the tillage effect. You want to show the nitrogen rate response. If you have an interaction, then you want to show in the figure that interaction term. The other point is, once you are making your paper, writing up, that each table or figure should stand alone from the text. Somebody should show you that figure, and you wouldn't have to read the text in order to interpret that figure. So that means the caption has to be thorough. It should include all the abbreviations that occur in the figure or the table, the statistical significance, what p-value you're using. If it was, if you have multiple sites, you'd say, this is site from Ashland Bottoms, and be complete in that. So just remember that should be independent. You shouldn't have to read the text in order to figure out what are the treatments and the points on that table figure. Okay, in writing the text in your results, you do not need, and you shouldn't repeat everything that's in the table or figure. What you want to do is be able to tell direct the reader to what you think is the key point or two from that table or figure. So if there's all sorts of confounding interactions, don't worry about it. They can look at the table or figure independently, but what you're trying to do is direct the reader to say, this is the key storyline for this data. Hopefully that makes sense. So, I have a lot of times students or professionals will start talking about, well, this was, significant here, but it wasn't significant in this other site. And then third site, it, was significant. You want to say, what are the key summary points? Otherwise, you're arguing with yourself, and the reader sits there and says, okay, what the heck is going on? I don't know what to think. It's your study. You need to summarize what you think is the point. If the reader doesn't agree with you, that's fine. You have to back it up because the reviewers will catch you on it, but you don't have to explain every single data point. And I guess that's another thing, is if you got like a regression line or a response and say N rate between no-till and conventional, well, if they're all no-till was always higher, but maybe at one N rate, the no-till was less than conventional till, the trend was, and the significance is that the no-till was higher than conventional, except for one data point. You don't need to say, okay, point that out. The reader will figure that out. You just need to say, what's the point? Is that no-till, that nitrogen no-till responded to N fertilizer more than conventional till, because that's what your stats tell you. And again, be careful. Statistics is a tool, it's not the end. So the stats aren't going to write the paper for you. Your stats are giving you the information you need to help interpret the information, but it's not the complete end. And we can talk a little bit more on that. On writing, write each sentence with a purpose. And I'll give a couple examples here at the end. There's a lot of sentences that people write that don't say anything. Say there was an interaction between nitrogen and tillage. All right, well, that's what your table says. What is that interaction? That's a wasted sentence. In some journals, they page or words count. I mean, there's a word limit. So if it's 4,500 or 6,500 words, you don't want to waste your words. You want to get to the point. And I'll have an example here if there's time. These are just little tips and tricks. Do not end sentences in a verb. Do not begin sentences with abbreviation. You're supposed to spell out, if it's at the beginning, the abbreviation. So say total organic carbon, you wouldn't put TOC was greater in no-till. You would say total organic carbon was greater in no-till. That takes up space. So what you then can say is that no-till had greater TOC. So you just flip it around and save some space and words. The fourth point there, first person versus passive, that's a matter of style. Generally, I think in our culture, we tend to be passive. If you read the ecological literature, it'll say the ecology, the journal, there's a lot of first person. I found this, we did this. That in our culture, it's like, you know, we found that no-till was greater than conventional. In our agronomy journal, it would say no-till was greater than conventional. We wouldn't use the first person. So you have to look at the style. I guess I grew up in the agriculture arena, so when I read ecology literature, it seems wrong, but it's the style. So you got to figure out the style that is appropriate for that discipline and journal to some extent. It's really critical to use the same verb tense throughout the manuscript. Do not switch. And again, it depends on the journal. The ecology will generally write in the present tense. So they use is, are. In agronomy, agriculture, we tend to use past tense generally. So was, were, you know, other past tense verbs. You know, the argument using past tense is when somebody finally reads your article, or somebody 5 years from now reads your article, it was past tense. You know, you did this 5 years ago, so no-till was greater, or precipitation was this. It's not precipitation is this. You know, it is 20 millimeters to that day. So, you know, I guess a style I've used to writing in past tense. It makes it awkward because when you're listing like the soil classification, you say that the soil was a haploidal. That's the name of a soil or soil classification. But theoretically, if you said the soil is a haploidal, it seems a little bit awkward, and sometimes, but if somebody reads it 10 years from now and they change soil classification system, then you know it was a haploidal 10 years ago, and now today it's, or you know, 10 years in the future it's something else. So I tend to write past tense, and most journals, at least in the agriculture arena, are past tense, but stay with the same verb tense. When you got sentence to sentence that changes, that's not good. Okay, some other advice: write often. You know, I know some people suggest that you write, you know, spend a block of time writing weekly, so you get in the habit of writing, and don't wait, you know, months to do writing. It's kind of, you know, a lot of practice. You know, I mentioned earlier about reading. You should read both scientific, but I encourage you to take a little bit of time off and read some pleasure articles, not necessarily newspapers. Their writing style is different, but read some, you know, books and that, just to learn a little bit of the writing style and punctuation and things like that. Read, if you get into a lab group that sit down and critique articles, that's great, because you can sit down and learn what was good or bad about an article. Once, I think, Dr. Jagadish is going to talk about this in the third session, but when you submit an article and get the reviews back, read those reviews carefully and revise. Don't just blow off the reviewer that says this is a terrible article. He or she is trying to make the interpretation, and maybe you didn't like what they said, but they're still trying to help you. I don't disagree, or I don't agree with all the reviewers' comments, and you can state that when you make a revision, and Krishna will talk hopefully about that. But pay attention. It doesn't hurt even before you submit an article or your thesis, have somebody else read it, because you spent so much time writing it that you know what you're saying, and maybe it's not coming through because you're so familiar with it. So especially if you're writing a thesis, you've spent so much time, going through it, revising it, have somebody else look at it. I think that helps. Okay. If we got a couple minutes, Carlos, I'm going to give an example here. Hopefully if I can find it. I just scanned. Yeah, I think I have to unshare if I'm right. Oh. Come on. Sorry. Okay. You can't see that, Carlos, right? I have to unshare and share again.
Oh, we can see. Yeah. You can just
The
drag
article, okay.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. So this is from Josh Schimmel's book, Sentences, and you want to be careful. Let me, let's see, I need to get it a little bit smaller. So hopefully you can read that, but he started off at the top up here, giving an example where the article he pulled it from, or example here, was the treatment dramatically increased X. Okay. That doesn't tell me much. All right. First of all, what does dramatically mean? Be careful of words like very, large. Large to one person, maybe small to another. Or dramatically, is that, a 10% difference or 100% difference? So you got to be careful. And later on, he says, there's a quote, I guess, in the previous page that says adverbs are dangerous in the amplifiers. So what he suggested here was the treatment dramatically increased X by a factor of 42. However, a factor of 42 probably is dramatic enough, so you don't need to say dramatically. So just say the treatment increased X by a factor of 42. So again, just be careful of the adverbs: large, largely, certainly, dramatically. He's got a list down: substantially. Be really careful of those. I criticize my own writing and my students that the nitrate values were high. Well, what is high? Get a quantifying factor and leave out the high. That's subject to interpretation. So I like this other. He took this paragraph and so I don't want to take too much time on it, but just an example. So here was a paragraph that he said it may be representative of a decent first draft. It's not terrible writing, but decent first draft. So he said, just to illustrate here, a central dogma of ecology has long been been that soil microorganisms must decompose organic matter, releasing inorganic N before nitrogen becomes available for plants to take up. All right. So what he's done, that's a lot of verbiage. First of all, he says up here, if you can see my pointer, a central dogma. Well, if it's a dogma, it's repetitive. So you don't need to say the obvious. And then I guess you can't see it, it's at the top. I get, yeah, so that's obvious. And then if you go through the article here, in the Arctic tundra, however, several lines of evidence challenge this, have forced us to question the importance of microbial decomposition in organic uptake by plants. He took all that out and then said that, and then well, you have to go through, you can read through that, and I take a look at that book, but here's a whole sentence, or maybe several sentences, that were in the original article. He scratched out 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 lines, okay? Because it's not saying, it's a lot of verbiage in there. You don't want to be verbose. And he gives several examples like that throughout the book. So I really encourage you. I can't remember, Carlos, how much, well, I guess I bought the book for you guys. I don't remember how much it was. It was $20, $30 maybe. He's not making money out of it. But I really would encourage you to buy the book if you're going to be in the writing business or writing this, because he does a really nice job of dissecting writing and what's good and bad, and how you start your introduction. So, like I said, I struggle at writing. But reading through this, it was like, even at my stage in the career, I thought, aha, it was some of the things I knew, but didn't really, he said it in a better way than I could have. So I would encourage you to follow up with the book. So I guess, Carlos, Analdo, I guess there's about 15 minutes or so, because I know you got another meeting here at 5. I just open it up for questions, Q&A. That's kind of the way I think we all learn, is observations. So, and hopefully it captured some of the things you wanted to hear.
Okay, so thank you, Dr. Rice. Yeah, definitely. It was pretty valuable for us, and hopefully we'll remember that when writing our papers or theses or dissertations. So I just sent the link of the book. It's the link from Amazon in the chat, so you can check it out. And probably there's a EPUB version for free. So you just put this in the name of the book in the Google. And I will start with the first question. It's a kind of biased question because I already know the answer. But what do you think about statements like the data shows or data reports or something like that?
Yeah, yeah, I forgot to put that in there. I hate that, because it says, well, and I had an example here of an article manuscript I have to review, and it says that the data shows, or the figure shows. Well, the figure is not an animate object. It's not up there standing and showing something. So it's not appropriate, and it's wasted language. So what I say, just go right to the punchline and say, that microbial activity was greater in the composted treatment, and then put in the parentheses table 1, figure 1. You don't need to say figure 1 shows. One, it's a waste of words, and I just don't like the figure is showing something. It really is, again, it's telling the story. The figure contains the information, or the table contains that information. So again, be concise. And let's see if I can pull up real quick here. Is it that one? Carlos, you're going to see this, but
Okay, just to let everyone know, I put the PDF file in the chat, so you can download that.
okay. Let's see, was it this article? Yeah, well, I don't think. Well, go ahead and ask me another question.
So feel free to make any question, guys.
Oh, yeah, so this article here, if you can see it on the screen, under results, it says soil chemical characteristics, the average soil chemical characteristics of the different crop rotation, including all sampling times and all sample sequences, show that the content of soil organic matter and nitrogen is significantly lowest in the plots. Okay, in the plots, I would just say we're lower in the continuous cultivation with silage maize. You don't need to say in the plots. That's a lot of students put that in there. Well, yeah. There was another article that I was gonna.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, it's full of this article got a lot of editing to do.
Okay, so if there is no more question, I have one more. So what will be the difference when writing a paper for a very specific journal like soil biology and biochemistry, or what else, agronomy journal or something like that, or writing an article for the for Nature Science or PNAS, Royal Society, or something like that?
Yeah, so writing for Nature, PNAS, or Science, you got to remember that it's an educated audience, scientifically educated audience, but they won't necessarily know all the terminology. But the other thing is you got to show more of a global or high impact of your study, where in a discipline specific, say soil biology and biochemistry or soil science side America agronomy journal, you're writing for a very detail on a particular study, in general, not always, but you're looking at a specific location, saying reporting results from Kansas State University corn soybean rotation at the North Farm. All right. For science or nature, you need to show how that study had a much broader impact on the science. So you don't get into the detail, and your introduction has to be definitely completely different. And Josh Schimmel talks about that in the book, right? Your introduction, you need to capture the reader right away about the impact of that study on general science or that focused area. Where in an agronomy journal, you might start off doing kind of building the literature review, and then at the end of your introduction literature review, you say what your objectives, what the question is, and what's your objectives. It's almost reverse in a science or nature review, telling it what is the question, and then building the case. So you lead off differently.
Okay.
But then your materials and methods aren't going to be, they're going to be supplemental material. You aren't going to report your materials and methods in a nature or science art. I mean, you're reporting it, but it's always supplement.
Okay. Any questions, Andrea?
Hey, yeah, I have one, Carlos. So, Dr. Rice, in terms of using passive or active voice, do you think using active will make your research or your results stronger, or at least give that feeling to the reader? or it kind of doesn't make any difference at all?
No, I think it's more the style of the discipline. I've been so used to passive voice when I read an ecology journal using the active voice. We did this, I did this. It's almost like bragging. I know it isn't, but it I almost cringe a little bit because I'm so used to the passive voice. I don't think it doesn't make it stronger, and like I said, it almost in some cases make it negative. So you have to. It depends again on the discipline and the type of journal. So you need to follow what is conventional for that discipline / journal.
Okay. Andre, you have a question?
Yes, Carlos, I do. Dr. Rice, my name is Andre. I'm a postdoc in the SEMPICH lab. And I have two questions regarding the discussion section. The first is, what do you feel about showing data in the result, but not really using this data for discussion? For instance, you are talking about wheat yield and discussion focusing the yield, but you also present yield components as, for instance, chemicals per square meter, but you don't discuss the yield component in the discussion, but you show in the result. And in the second question about the discussion is, do you suggest any general structure for the discussion, like having an opening paragraph, first reaffirming the objectives of the research and the main findings, and maybe a final paragraph about suggestions of new topics, research topics related to your findings?
Yeah. So the first question, I guess there's a couple of schools of thought on writing discussion, like you said, and referring to the data. You definitely don't want to introduce new data into the discussion. It should be putting together what you've already mentioned in the results section. So it might be, if you have wheat yield and say, soil nitrogen content and weather, it would be synthesizing that together in the discussion and then how that relates to other studies. So you don't want to introduce new data into the discussion section. It should already be mentioned, I would say discussed, but it should already be presented in the results section. I know some people will not talk about a table per se, but they'll reinforce in the discussion, the concept and put in parentheses table to figure 3, whatever, but they won't discuss that particular figure. It's already been mentioned in the results. Does that help?
Yes, sure.
Okay. Now you can introduce a new concept if you're synthesizing, and maybe add a paragraph where you're synthesizing everything and you come up with a new model, figure that might put everything together. You might do that in the discussion, but as far as hard data, you wouldn't necessarily bring up new into the discussion. It would only be synthesis and summarizing it. That's a good question on discussion. At the beginning, the first paragraph discussion, I got to think about that. I'm not sure. You definitely can, at the end of the discussion, put together some unknowns, future research questions that you are still remain to be done. And that's helpful to for future researchers to find out, this is what I found, but this is a direction that needs to be taken. I didn't mention about conclusions. Section, some journals and will require conclusions. Others will not. Actually, will not require or not let it. You don't want a conclusion. You got your abstract, right? So a conclusion shouldn't be just repetition of the abstract. Yeah, I kind of go either way on the conclusions. I think it's just better to put it as in a paragraph of discussion, but that's just my style. The conclusion, you got to be careful. You're just not rehashing everything. I don't know about the beginning paragraph of discussion. I got to think now. Yeah, I'm not sure.
Well, thanks a lot, Dr. Rice. It was great.
Okay, so it's almost 5. So feel free to go to the John Deere session. I will just make the last question and just make sure it will be recorded so everyone can access that whenever you want. So my question is, if you think it's kind of more for technical reports and extension reports, it's not about thesis or papers, but there's a challenge when you have to translate very academic or technical stuff for farmers. So
Yeah.
what do you have any tips when, to do not forget the technical words or the technical sense of our work or our research and make this readable for farmers?
Right. It's definitely a different style of writing. Whether you're writing for like a progress report or for even like Farm Journal or something like that, is completely different. You aren't worried about this, significant digits. You're worried about what's the impact of your treatment on yield. They don't care whether it's significant at the 0.05 level. So you wouldn't necessarily present that. Maybe, Carlos, like in the fertilizer progress report, you might, because it's more scientific. But if you're writing an extension bulletin, you wouldn't report out significance at the 0.05 level. You would just say, there was a significant effect of X on Y, nitrogen on yield, but you wouldn't give the finer academic information on that. If you're used to writing for research, journals or thesis or dissertation, it takes a little bit of art and practice to write for the farmer level. You just got to remember, one, they get turned off by all the detail and all the technical detail in that sense. They want to know what the bottom line is. So keep it simple. Even for journal articles, I keep it simple. But it's important for educating the public or farmers, try to put it in their language terms that they would understand. So it's important that you get out and talk to farmers so you know the language that they're using. It's a different skill and takes some practice. You mentioned the award I got, but I value in going out and meeting with the farmers and learning from them. So I know their language, know their issues, and then trying to translate the technical language into something that they can appreciate.
Okay, so just in time. Thank you, Dr. Rice, again, on behalf of the Agronomy Graduate Student Association. And we're looking forward to the next lecture of our writing series. Thank you.
And if there's any follow-up questions or whatever, I'd be happy to try to answer.
Okay, so thank you all.
Okay, thanks for putting it together.
All right, several people say thank you in the chat.